On a wind-scoured plateau at the edge of the world, a woman kneels beside a shallow pit lined with stones. Around her, the land is the color of rust and ash, volcanic, treeless, battered by salt wind that never stops. But inside the pit, something green is growing, soft, fleshy-leafed, out of place. It is a vine, heavy with tubers, planted in stone-ringed gardens that dot this island like punctuation marks. The islanders call it Kumara, and it has been here for centuries, long before any European ship found this speck of rock in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. Here is the problem. This plant does not belong here, not on this island, not anywhere in this ocean. Its ancestors grew nearly 5,000 miles away, on the other side of an ocean so vast that for centuries scholars insisted no human being could have crossed it. And yet, here it is, thriving, waiting. 2,000 miles from the nearest continent in the soil of the most isolated, inhabited place on Earth. How did it get here? Welcome back to Ruins Untold. I'm going to take you somewhere history forgot, or maybe decided it was better you didn't know. Today we're going to look at two quiet clues, hidden in the soil and the stone of Easter Island, that suggest its people were never as alone as we were taught. Stay with me. This one goes deep. To understand why a sweet potato is a mystery, you have to understand the ocean it had to cross. The Pacific is not just the largest ocean on Earth. It is larger than every continent on Earth combined. For most of human history, it was considered the ultimate barrier. A blue desert with no landmarks, no coastlines, nothing but water in every direction for thousands of miles. And yet, somewhere around 1200 CE, a group of human beings did the unthinkable. They sailed into the empty quarter of that ocean in double-hulled canoes built from hand-lashed timber and woven sails, navigating by stars, swells, and the flight paths of birds. And they found an island so small, so remote, that it would not be rediscovered by Europeans for another 500 years. They called it Tepito o Tehenua, the navel of the world. Today, we call it Rapa Nui, Easter Island. The settlers who arrived there were master navigators, part of a vast wave of Polynesian expansion that had, over centuries, pushed steadily eastward across the Pacific. From the islands near Southeast Asia, through Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, out toward the Marquesas, the Cook Islands, the Society Islands, and finally to this last outpost. A triangular volcanic island barely 63 square miles in size, with no other land visible on the horizon in any direction. They brought with them everything they needed to survive: chickens, dogs, taro, breadfruit, bananas, the standard toolkit of Polynesian colonization, carried in canoes across thousands of miles of open water. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, nearly 5,000 miles to the east, a very different world was unfolding. Along the coast of South America, in what is now Peru, sophisticated maritime societies had been navigating the Pacific coastline for centuries. They built reed boats and balsa wood rafts capable of carrying cargo and crew along ocean currents that swept north and west, away from the continent, out toward the open Pacific. These were not primitive vessels. They were engineered for distance. Between these two worlds lay nothing but water, and, according to the maps drawn by 20th century scholars, an unbridgeable cultural and historical gap. Polynesia was Polynesia, the Americas were the Americas. The two had developed in total isolation from one another, separated not just by ocean, but by the entire arc of human history. That was the assumption. That was the story that held for a very long time. And then someone looked a little closer at what was actually growing in the gardens of Rapa Nui. In the early 20th century, botanists working across the Pacific began noticing something strange. The sweet potato, Ipomoea batatas, was everywhere. Not just on Rapa Nui, but across Hawaii, New Zealand, the Cook Islands, the Society Islands. It was a staple crop, deeply woven into Polynesian agriculture, ritual, and language. There was just one problem. The sweet potato is not Polynesian. It is not Asian. Every wild ancestor of Ipomoea batatas, every genetic relative, every trace of its domestication, all of it points to one place and one place only: Central and South America. And the timing made it worse. Radiocarbon dating of sweet potato remains from Polynesian archaeological sites placed the plant in the Pacific centuries before Columbus ever set sail. This was not a post-contact European import. This plant had crossed the Pacific, or been carried across it, long before any European knew the Pacific existed. How does a plant, domesticated in the Andes, end up growing in stone garden pits 8,000 miles away, hundreds of years before any recorded contact between the two regions? Then there was the stone. Travelers to Rapa Nui had long marveled at the moai, the colossal stone heads and torsos that stand sentinel along the island's coastline. But a few of the island's ceremonial platforms, the ahu on which the moai once stood, held a different kind of mystery. At a site called Vinapu, the foundation stones of one ahu were not roughly stacked, as much of the island's stonework was. They were cut, fitted. Massive andesite blocks shaped with such precision that they locked together almost without gaps. A style of masonry that visitors immediately recognize from somewhere else entirely: the high Andes. The stonework of Cusco, of Tiwanaku, of the great walls of the Inca and their predecessors, where blocks weighing tons were carved to interlock with millimeter precision. Two clues: a plant that shouldn't be there, a wall that looked like it belonged on the other side of an ocean. In 1947, a Norwegian explorer named Thor Heyerdahl decided to test whether the distance between South America and Polynesia was really as impossible as everyone assumed. He built a raft, Kon-Tiki, out of balsa logs, using only materials and techniques that would have been available to pre-Columbian South Americans. Then he and a 5-man crew launched it from the coast of Peru and let the Pacific currents carry them west. 101 days later, they made landfall in the Tuamotu Islands of Polynesia. Roughly 4,300 miles on a raft of logs and rope, powered by nothing but current and wind. It became one of the most famous voyages of the 20th century. A sensation. Proof, Heyerdahl argued, that South Americans could have settled Polynesia, that the sweet potato, the stonework, even the moai themselves were evidence of a forgotten migration eastward across the Pacific. The world was electrified. The scientific establishment was not. Here is what the archaeological and genetic record actually shows. And for decades, it showed something very different from Heyerdahl's vision. The overwhelming weight of evidence, linguistic, archaeological, and genetic, demonstrates that Polynesia was settled from the west, not the east. The languages spoken across the Pacific, including Rapa Nui's own language, belong to the Austronesian family, with roots tracing back through Southeast Asia and ultimately to Taiwan, going back thousands of years before Rapa Nui was ever reached. The pottery styles, the tools, the burial practices, the canoe technology, all of it fits a long, well-documented eastward expansion across the Pacific, island by island, over roughly 3,000 years. This is one of the most remarkable feats of maritime exploration in human history, achieved entirely by Polynesian navigators with no help required from South America. As for the sweet potato, most botanists and archaeologists settled on a different explanation than Heyerdahl's mass migration. The leading theory was that Polynesian voyagers, already the greatest long-distance sailors on the planet, simply did what they had always done. They sailed east, reached the coast of South America, encountered the sweet potato, and carried it back home on the return voyage. Polynesians, in this telling, were not the recipients of contact. They were the ones who made the contact, sailing toward South America, not the other way around. And the Vinapu stonework? Mainstream archaeologists pointed out that fitted interlocking masonry isn't unique to the Andes. When you're working with hard volcanic stone and you want a structure that survives earthquakes and centuries of weather, certain solutions emerge again and again, independently across unrelated cultures. A phenomenon researchers call convergent evolution. Different peoples facing the same engineering problem, arriving at similar answers with no contact required. Heyerdahl's raft voyage, in this view, proved only that a journey was physically possible, not that it had actually happened. And certainly not that it had happened the way he proposed, with South Americans as the colonizers of Polynesia. For decades, this was where the conversation ended. Heyerdahl was a romantic, an adventurer, a brilliant showman, but not, in the eyes of most archaeologists, a reliable guide to what actually occurred. The case felt closed. Polynesians went east. They came back with a plant. End of story. Except for one detail that nobody could quite explain away. If Polynesian sailors really did reach South America and return, bringing back a plant, a crop, an entire agricultural practice, wouldn't they have left something else behind, too? Something harder to argue with than a vegetable or a stone wall? Something written into human DNA itself? In 2020, a team of geneticists published the results of one of the largest studies ever conducted on Pacific Island populations. They analyzed the genomes of more than 800 individuals across 17 Polynesian island populations and 15 indigenous groups along the Pacific coast of the Americas, from Mexico down to Chile. What they found sent a quiet shockwave through the field. Buried within the DNA of multiple Polynesian populations, including people from the Marquesas Islands and Mangareva, was a segment of ancestry that traced unmistakably back to indigenous South Americans. Not a vague, ambiguous signal, a specific, identifiable genetic contribution consistent across populations separated by thousands of miles of ocean. And then came the date. Using the patterns of genetic recombination, essentially a molecular clock that tracks how DNA segments break apart and shuffle with each generation, the researchers calculated when this mixing first occurred. Around 1200 CE, the same century Rapa Nui was settled. This was not a vague cultural echo. This was a documented, datable contact event between Polynesian and Native American populations, written into the genomes of people living today on islands thousands of miles from the South American coast. And the location of that contact appears to have been in eastern Polynesia, the Marquesas, or islands near them, meaning that whatever happened before Rapa Nui was even colonized. The people who eventually settled Rapa Nui may have carried this ancestry and the sweet potato with them as part of a network of contact that already existed. This single finding reframes everything. For decades, the debate had been framed as a binary. Either Heyerdahl was right, and South Americans colonized Polynesia, or the mainstream was right, and there was no genetic contact at all, just a single transported crop. The 2020 genetic data didn't fit neatly into either box. It suggested something stranger than both. Actual human beings from two civilizations separated by the largest ocean on the planet met. They had children, and the descendants of that meeting carried the evidence forward for 800 years, hidden in plain sight, until modern sequencing technology could finally read it. Some researchers have pointed to other threads that may connect to this same tapestry. Most famously, a set of pre-Columbian chicken bones, excavated from a site in southern Chile, which some genetic analyses suggested carried a signature linking them to Polynesian chicken lineages, potentially predating European contact. The findings remain contested, and later studies have pushed back on the dating and interpretation. But the debate itself is telling. A decade ago, the mere suggestion of a pre-Columbian chicken with Polynesian ancestry in South America would have been dismissed outright. Now it's a live question, argued in peer-reviewed journals. And what about Vinapu, that wall of fitted stone that looks so much like it belonged in the Andes? On its own, it may indeed be convergent evolution, two cultures solving the same problem in similar ways. But on its own is exactly the framing that's now in question. If the official story already required us to believe that Polynesian voyagers reached the South American coast, interacted with its people closely enough to exchange genes, not just goods, not just plants, but people, then the idea that they might have also observed and been influenced by Andean stoneworking techniques no longer sounds like fringe speculation. It sounds like exactly what you'd expect from sustained contact between two technologically sophisticated cultures. If even a single one of these threads is real, the genetics, the chickens, the stonework, then the story we've told about Rapa Nui as the loneliest place on Earth, a civilization that rose and fell in total isolation, simply cannot be true. Somewhere in the deep past, two branches of humanity that evolved on opposite sides of the planet's largest ocean reached across that gap and touched. What makes this mystery different from so many others on this channel is that it isn't really about Rapa Nui at all. It's about how we draw the boundaries of the ancient world and who gets left out of the picture. For most of the 20th century, the working assumption in archaeology was that pre-Columbian civilizations developed in isolated bubbles. The Americas were one bubble, the Pacific was another. Contact between them before 1492 was treated as essentially impossible, and anyone who suggested otherwise risked being lumped in with far wilder claims about lost continents and ancient astronauts. That caution wasn't unreasonable. Heyerdahl's specific theory that South Americans were the primary settlers of Polynesia really was overturned by the broader evidence. But in rejecting his conclusion, the field may have also rejected the possibility of contact altogether. For decades, even as quieter clues kept accumulating. The sweet potato, the stonework at Vinapu, the chicken bones, and now, the genetics. And Rapa Nui isn't an isolated case. Across the Pacific and the Americas, researchers continue to debate other potential traces of long-distance pre-Columbian contact. Shared words for certain plants, similarities in fishing technology, even disputed claims about textile and metallurgy techniques. Most of these remain unresolved, contested, argued over in academic papers that rarely make it into a textbook. The stakes of getting this right are larger than one island. If ancient peoples, without metal tools, without compasses, without any of the navigation technology we associate with the age of exploration, were capable of deliberately crossing thousands of miles of open ocean and returning home again, then our entire model of the ancient world as a series of disconnected pockets of civilization may be wrong. The ancient Pacific may not have been a void between civilizations. It may have been a highway. Picture again that woman kneeling beside her garden of stone-ringed pits on a windswept island 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. The vine in her hands has a story older than her island itself, a story that begins on a distant coastline, crosses an ocean that was supposed to be uncrossable, and ends here in soil that has nourished generations of her people. We don't know, even now, exactly how it happened. We don't know who made that crossing first, or in which direction, or what they said to each other when two peoples, separated by everything except the will to go further, finally met. But the evidence is there, in the genome, in the garden, in the wall. The only question left is the one that started this story. How did it get here? And maybe the more unsettling question is this: what else crossed that ocean and left no trace we've found yet? So here's what we want to know. Which direction do you think the contact went first? Polynesians reaching South America, or South Americans reaching the Pacific Islands? Drop your theory in the comments. We read every one. If you want to keep digging into the mysteries the textbooks leave out, subscribe and stay close. Because the next stone we're going to look at shouldn't exist either.